How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Soccerex TV. I have Olek Loewenstein, Global President of Sport for Televisa Univision. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you have a really interesting role. You're at the forefront of football and soccer coverage in the U.S. and Mexico. So just from starting off, what would you say is the future of soccer consumption on the continent?
Oh, uh, that's a complicated question because I mean, if I knew a lot of these answers, I would probably be rich on a yacht somewhere. But here's so here's my take on it, right? And I'm going to be a little backward looking and a little bit forward looking, and I'll split it in a couple of different sections. So first of all, fandom, right? There's for sure growing fandom of the sport, right? Especially among younger generations. Um, I think I was looking at some numbers the past few days, and for example, the most searched leagues online, which is not a great measure, but it's a good litmus test, were the English Premier League and the Mexican League, right? In the US. If you go further down, you start going to other leagues, right? I think there is for sure an acknowledgement of fans of the sport, and I think fandom is for certain gonna grow, right? I mean, if I would bet, I would for sure bet.
Right.
I think there's demographic shifts that are so number one would be fandom. Number two, I would say there's demographic shifts that are supporting that growth, right? Obviously, the demographic of the US is changing. It's way more multicultural for sure. Younger generations are exploring other sports that are not necessarily the traditional sports, and among those, obviously, soccer has been the one that has seen major growth. And if you join that with, I would say, the third point, which would be media rights and broadcasting and availability of this product, then that has also expanded, right? I mean, if you think about it, since the previous World Cup, right, in the US, and I'll finish with the World Cup in 2026, all those things have been growing fandom, demographic shifts. Uh, 1996, it was impossible a few years after the World Cup to find much soccer. Today, there is soccer everywhere. Like you see it on free to air, you see it on cable, you see it on streaming. Most of the bigger leagues around the world can be consumed in the US. Um, so that also is another factor. A fourth factor, I would say, is investment and expansion. I mean, for sure, the MLS has done a great job in terms of soccer clubs and organizations growing, right? And in investing in the sport, we have now dedicated soccer fields in park. We have dedicated soccer stadiums to watch. We have dedicated soccer complexes around the US for tournaments. I mean, previously, you all these soccer tournaments will be held like in baseball stadiums or in parks that have football stadiums that were adapted to soccer. Like those things are changing. And then that leads into the what I would say would be the fifth point, which is grassroots level participation. I mean, I still think pay for play in the US is a problem, right? In the grander scheme of soccer growth. But for sure, there is more youth participation in soccer today that it was a year ago, and it's going to be less than it's going to be in a couple of years, especially on the women's side, right? There's another element on the women's side that has to do with scholarships at the college level, which I think it's a more complex topic, but for sure there's women's and men's on the grassroots level. If you layer on top of that the number of international events that are starting to happen in terms of soccer in the territory, that compounds it, right? I mean, thinking,
Mhm.
sure, we can think of the World Cup in 26, but let's think of things like, I mean, you have Copa America next year, right? Which is you had Copa America in 2016. You have all these international clubs coming to play friendly games in the summer. You potentially will have the Club World Cup in 2025, the World Cup in 26, potentially the Women's World Cup in 27. So you have all these international events that I think are growing and are creating, I think, uh, uh, as a consequence, I think, soccer culture that didn't exist in the US as prominently, let's say, 10 to 15 years ago. Like you have now pubs in Philly or in New York or in LA that are completely dedicated to soccer. There's places that are sports bars that you don't walk in and see NBA and MLB and NFL. You only see soccer and soccer
Right.
jerseys everywhere. So I would say those are all the elements that build into explaining what I think is going to be a continuous growth of the sport in the upcoming years.
You mentioned the upcoming tournaments. How do you think those kinds of tournaments impact casual fans? Maybe not people that were really already into it, but the people that might just kind of be kind of introduced to it, and now that it's kind of the hotbed of the global football scene for the next 2 to 3 years.
I think, listen, I think bringing international events into markets that are new also that would help, right? Create an event, right? And if you're in New York or you're in LA, I mean, you have plenty of things to do every single day. But there's other markets in the US that where you bring some of these larger events, it creates a destination for families for the weekend, right? It creates a destination to do something new. Uh, and I think it opens the door for premium product with top of the line players to come to the country and for people that have never experienced it to experience it, right? I don't want to go into the messy rabbit hole, but in essence, I'm from Miami. I mean, I'm not from Miami. I live in Miami, but I think pre-Messi, it was hard to see kids having any jersey that wasn't Mbappe or that wasn't European or any of that. After Messi, everybody has a Messi shirt in Miami, right? And that's not only like the Messi mania captures casual fans, and
Right.
him playing in different states and different cities also brings casual fans. People go and want to see him. People will go and want to see the German national team, and people will go and want to see the Argentinian national team. So I think all these elements basically what they do is they entice people to at least experience the sport once, and then hopefully after that they engage with it a little bit more.
Interesting. Uh, One thing, this might be getting into a more specific area, but from a broadcast kind of area, can you describe for someone who doesn't actually know just how big the Mexican national team is in the United States?
Yeah. So the Mexican national team, I think, is an interesting phenomenon, right? In the US. Um, I'll start with two things. The Mexican League is the most watched soccer league in the US, period. There is no arguing. And also, the Mexican national team is the most watched team or followed team in the US in terms of broadcast, right? Uh, and there is there the, the Mexican national team. Um, I think it's a cultural phenomenon, right? Uh, the Mexican diaspora in the U.S., I think, is very tied to three things: their food, right? I mean, I think it's a cult of a
Mhm.
cultural relevance. Religion with La Virgen de Guadalupe, right? It's another factor, and soccer is the third one. And it's truly what links the diaspora in the U.S. to their roots, be it first, second, third, or fourth generation, right? What's starting to happen is that you have the younger generations that will, and you start to see this in Mexican national team games, that people have like half of the jerseys Mexican, half of the jerseys from the US. Mexico plays any team, they go for Mexico. Mexico plays the US, and the family is torn because the younger generations are following. But I think that's the culture phenomenon, right? So it's the I think the TV audience is obviously quite substantial. The viewership is primarily driven by that diaspora. The marketing element has been huge, um, and I would say it's been like an avalanche, right? It starts with that cultural attachment. It grows because of the Spanish language coverage that we provide, right? That you have on this property. It grows further because there's tailored content surrounding this property. The community engages with it, which is another element that it's important. Um, you then suddenly you have all this merchandising around the U.S. where everybody has the Mexican national team jersey, and then that grows into partnerships, and you see how brands like Wells Fargo or AT&T are associated with the Mexican national team. So I think it's a cultural phenomenon, and obviously Hispanics are the number one sport for Hispanics is undoubtedly soccer, and I think that helps. And with the large Mexican diaspora, they just that the interest in that property grows. I mean, I think Mexico is Mexico is probably the only team that plays outside of their country as a home game, and
Right.
that's how big it is. I mean, Mexico comes to, like, you could think, like, for example, Poland could play in Chicago and play like if it were a home team, right? Germany maybe, um, but Mexico literally can play in any place in the U.S. and will fill its entire stadium, and it will feel like a home game.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting in that regard. So you mentioned '94, and after '94, you have the launch of MLS. You have really the beginning of what we have now.
Yep.
Fast forward to the end of to 2026, the tournament plays out. It's a wonderful tournament. Everything goes great. From a CONCACAF perspective, from MLS, Liga MX, what do you think all these teams would consider the best case scenario walking out of this tournament?
So listen, I mean, obviously, when the U.S. hosted the World Cup in '94, that had a lasting impact on the sport in this country, right? And I don't think it's going to be any different with 26. It's hard for me to think of what that will mean, because I think, as you said, both CONCACAF and the MLS should be thinking now what is it that they want from that tournament and start preparing now, right? Uh, I think there is the for sure there, as you said, it's the opportunity to bring casual fans into the sport, right? For people to experience the passion of a tournament like that, I think you fall in love with the sport. I mean, many people fall in love with the world of soccer during World Cups, not necessarily when you are there, but when you see them, you see it's an event that captures the entire world. And having it in your backyard and going to some of these games, I think it's going to be the perfect opportunity to piggyback and to expose as many people as possible to the sport for to later capitalize on it, right? Uh, I would caution that it needs to be done in a very smart way, because I think you want the biggest exposure possible and not make it an elite event, right? In terms of,
Mm-hmm.
you want the stadiums packed with people. You want the largest crowd that you can have, uh, even if it's at the expense of not making top dollar for some of these gates, right? You want these things to be packed. You want the people to have the contact with the sport. I think coming out of that, if I think MLS would want its league to be stronger. I think it would want its league to be more established, right? I mean, there's still a couple of expansion teams that are coming here and there. I would venture to think come 2026, that's you're mostly locked for a period of time in terms of expansion and you're growing.
Right.
I think CONCACAF makes money because of all the events that will happen from there to 26, and they reinvest that money in growing the sport in other regions, right, of North America. Um, so listen, from a mark, everybody will make economic gains because of 2026. The question now is, how do you reinvest those gains in order for that to be a platform for the sport to grow after the event?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's going to be one of those moments that we're going to mark in time in in a
Yep.
decade from now. I think that the attendance is there, and it's now about that television and how we get
Yep.
that NFL, NBA style kind of love for it when you're not going to the matches. So,
It's
Olek,
complex.
yeah,
It's Think about it this way. You go to so you I take my son to the World Cup. He goes, never seen the sport. He will fall in love with it. Great. He walks out of that. Where can he consume soccer?
right.
So it starts being complex. You need to pay $15 a month to watch the MLS, or you pay $6 a month to, like, what? How do you make it easy for that casual fan to start being engaged afterwards, right? I think that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be that, because as you described, there's paywalls, there's different things like that, and there's a lot of free TV, a lot of free sports elsewhere. So
Yep,
different networks like yourselves and other ones are going to have to figure out that model going forward.
absolutely.
Um, so thank you so much, Olek. Really appreciate your time. This was a really insightful conversation. We're really excited to have you at Soccerex to continue to bring that perspective. And yeah, just looking forward to Miami in 2023.
Thank you so much.